Hello, my name is Françoise Molenaar and this is That Fertile Feeling, the podcast. If you've been trying to get pregnant for a while and you feel like life has lost a bit of its spark in the process, then this is the podcast for you. Every week I speak to experts and peers from around the globe to discover how you can connect to your feminine flow and stop trying so hard to conceive, and how to put some magic back in your life and your relationships. Are you ready to make life just a bit more effortless? Let's dive in.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of That Fertile Feeling, the podcast. My name is Françoise and today I would like to talk to you about the connection between fertility and creativity. It's something that's come up on recent podcast episodes. It's also something that's coming up in my sessions with women who are trying to change their fertility journey, change the way in which they're trying to get pregnant, really conceive from the place of love, trust and surrender. And it's something that I really recognize from my own fertility journey, that the whole creative process and your fertility are extremely tightly connected. And that if you're blocked in your fertility, you're very likely also blocked in other creative areas in your life and vice versa. Now, that might not be the case for everyone, but I thought it would be good to do a podcast episode about this, because maybe this is something that you recognize in yourself, and that you could use some practical tips or tools for to start letting your creative juices flow a bit more, and through that also see how you can improve your fertility. So how does this connection work exactly? What I see in my practice is that the thing that both of these processes have in common, so the process of trying to get pregnant, and the process is that a process, the being stuck in other areas of your life as well, especially in the creative field, is that we usually apply a similar kind of energy to these fields. And that's an energy of forcing, of trying really hard to achieve something. And where we want to get at is that we stop trying to control the process and that we allow for life to flow through us much more. So the first thing that came to mind for me when I was taking some notes for this podcast episode was the writer's block. That often happens when someone has had a successful book, or, when they really depend on their ability to write for their income, and then this writer's block happens. And it's impossible for them to get through that just with the rational mind, because it's about the block comes from wanting something to happen rather than just allowing for it to happen. And it's really hard to put this to words, because this is actually something that happens much more at a subconscious level or at an energetic level. But I think when I say these things, like trying to make something happen or allow it to happen, you can sort of feel the difference, right, in your body. And you can also feel probably how that applies to trying to get pregnant, or inviting in a pregnancy. It's so much softer, it's so much more open. So as I said, what I see in many of my clients and also myself is that when it doesn't flow in one area, it usually also doesn't flow in another area of life. And some of the things that I often see, and maybe it's just the clients that I attract, right? But I've also seen it a lot with my podcast guests, is that what many women who are struggling to conceive have in common is that they're perfectionists, that they like to be in control. And then when something doesn't work as we would want it to, we start to take all of these steps. We start to invest heavily, and trying to, start making to-do lists. We become even more action oriented, and we're trying to see, okay, what is it that I can do to make this work? So if I just talk, from my own experience, I started doing research into nutrition, into supplements, into holistic therapies, So all of these things that I thought might help me improve my fertility. And of course, that's not bad, right? But it's all driven by the mind. It wasn't driven necessarily by me feeling that this was what I needed to do for myself, or listening to my body and having my body tell me, what it needed me to do to improve my fertility. It was very much like a researcher just doing the research. Okay, this isn't happening, so how can I fix this? It's about wanting to fix also. And this is another thing that I've heard from many women, is that they quickly have the feeling that it might become a long journey for them. And it's something I recognize. So I think after 2 months of trying to conceive, I thought straight away, like, maybe this isn't going to happen for us. And it could have been my intuition telling me that, but I have a feeling that this was actually me not being in control, and thereby going like to the extreme straight away, because there was no indication at the time that it would be difficult for me to conceive. And I think that really matches that personality type, like the perfectionist who wants to be in control. And it's not just researchers like myself. I actually just did a podcast interview with someone this morning, Marina Lishova, who is a womb wisdom keeper. And she told me how she was heavily invested in all of these more feminine practices because she also wanted to get pregnant. And then she was sort of like, why isn't this working for me? I'm doing everything right. So even if you're like in your divine feminine, or trying to be, you can bring that attitude of, this is something that I have control over, to your fertility process or to life. And it just doesn't work that way. And so this energy of fixing, of trying to do everything that we need to be doing, what I see in the women I work with, and what I've also definitely experienced myself, is that we can also bring that attitude to work. So if I take myself as an example, I've shared before in a podcast that I worked as a conflict researcher before I quit my job and started doing this. Before that, I did a PhD in Latin American political science. And I don't know, I knew when I was doing my studies that I wanted to get that PhD. I wanted to continue on in academia. I wanted to do research. So when a PhD position opened up, I was like, I don't care what topic I work on. I just want to do the research. That's what got me the position, because I knew what my supervisor was interested in. So I wrote a proposal that really matched her interests, and I got that position. Also because I think I'm a good researcher, but there was that opportunity there to work with her. She needed someone who was also looking into the legal regulation of political parties. That was my theme at the time. So I wrote a proposal around that, and I got that PhD position. And I spent the next 5 years working on a topic that did not interest me at all. I think, along the way, once you become an expert in something, you bring your own expertise to the table, and you have sort of a framework that you use to capture, or to sort of, when you read articles or books, you're filling in that framework in your mind. So you do get some sort of affinity with the topic. But my benchmark was always, would I want to read anything about this topic on my free time or before I go to bed? One of my colleagues, he would call it light reading. He would have light reading on this topic, and I thought, no way would I ever read something about this before I go to bed or on my spare time, because it just doesn't interest me. So, I got my PhD. I did the work for 5 years, working more than full time on this topic. Got burned out along the way. And I got there through discipline. I got there through hard work. I didn't get there because there was this intrinsic motivation to learn everything that I could about the legal regulation of political parties in Latin America, although I'm now the expert on this in the world. Now, I was lucky. After that, I got a job as a conflict researcher, which aligned more with my interests, because I am interested in, not so much in conflict, but we really focused on resilience. So how societies can recover from violent conflict, from terrorist events, how societies can recover, and also seeing how resilient people are in places where there's nothing left, and that people will always find a way to come through. So that was very inspiring to me. Um, and I worked on migration for a while, which was a hot topic like 5 or 6 years ago, 10 years ago almost. So there was some more interest, which made it easier, but still, and this is like a larger story about why I left my job. I was working in a field where there was very little room for positive change because migration is a very political subject, as you might all know. So I was doing the work, but I could see that there was no room to have really substantive discussions about what would be good policies, because that was my job, was advising policymakers. But everything was so political, and I'm not a political beast, so I like it when my findings do the talking for me. So I was putting in so many hours, working really hard, and at the same time feeling like, yeah, there is something missing for me. Maybe still a little bit of that intrinsic motivation also, although I did enjoy reading about these topics a bit more than I did about political party laws we call them. But I was forcing myself through those days, not taking care of my energy. And at the same time, I started doing these courses on the weekend, like working with women, doing a meditation training. So I found that on my weekends, I was actually starting to work much more with themes and topics that interested me. Organizing women's circles, doing these really deep meditations, helping women break through their traumas. And I felt so much more alive. So that's when I felt that something needed to shift. Now, interestingly enough, this whole thing of me doing all that stuff on the weekends happened during my fertility journey, because I started to recognize that I wasn't balanced, that I was taking that very masculine attitude to conception, the attitude of working really, I'm not talking about gender here, right, but about this more spiritual or Eastern conception of masculine and feminine, the yin and the yang. So being very goal-oriented and being much more in the now, in the process. It's about, the masculine is about doing and the feminine is about being. So I recognized I needed to be much more, because I was just doing stuff all the time. Started doing those those courses on the weekend that really focused on being. And somewhere along the way discovering that I was actually quite good at what I was doing, at the being. And that I wanted to share that with others. Try to see if I could incorporate that in my work weeks as well, to see if I could, find a different flow at work. I never really succeeded in that. And then at some point I thought, I'm just going to quit my job and really focus on this whole thing that does get me excited, which is working with women, especially women who are having trouble conceiving. And all along the way, that's my own fertility journey progressed. So I ended up having 3 children over the course of the last 3 years, 2 IVF babies and 1 spontaneous pregnancy. And really, I can say, like, it's not that I'm still the perfectionist. I still have that imprint of wanting to work really hard, but still, every day being aware of how I want to show up, that I want to bring a much softer attitude to life, and really focus on doing things that nurture me in my fertility and also in my work. And that's what I see in the women I work with as well. It's like, so my own story was that I started doing this to improve my fertility, and it actually changed all of these other aspects in my life as well, up to the point of me quitting my job and finding something that I don't even love doing, that I feel this is what I was meant to be doing. And that's what I see in so many of the women I work with as well, is that they are stuck in their fertility, they are stuck in their jobs. And then as they start to develop a different way of trying to conceive, that's much more focused on surrendering, that's much more focused on allowing, on that nourishment of yourself, by not working so hard anymore, but really taking a step back and seeing, okay, what is it that's needed right now? That's then affecting other aspects of their life as well. And it makes total sense, because if you look at the womb, where, pregnancy happens, the womb is also, for us women, it's our core source of creation. That's where creation happens. It's where we create life, but it's also where we store all of our creative energies. So once we start connecting to the womb, once we start connecting to the feminine, once we start clearing out those old patterns of, having, forcing, working, being goal-oriented all the time, perfectionism, competition, those are sort of the main masculine structures that we are brought up in. Once we start experimenting with a different way of being, you get that creative energy flowing. And if you look at astrology, you see the same thing. So in astrology, the 5th house is the house of both motherhood and children, but also of creativity. So you also see that connection there, that the connection of those two areas. Now, what this all means is that if you want to adopt a different attitude towards conception, but you don't really know how, and you feel like, because with conception, there's also so many fears and insecurities and grief and pain. So it can be a really difficult area of your life to start changing. Like I always say, one of the most healing things you can do is really tune into your body this month and say, is this the right month for me to conceive? And if your body then says no, like, do you dare take a break? But that can be a really big step. So if you want to start experimenting more with this link between creativity and fertility, you can also look at other areas in your life and try to see, like, where can I start creating a bit more? Creating from that free flow. And then once you start tuning into that feeling, start tuning into, how does this make me feel when I just create because something wants to be birthed through me? You can start recognizing that on your fertility journey as well, because moving from, trying really hard to surrender or to, being a bit more laid back, it's not something you can do with your mind. So you really have to feel into that and feel like, what else is possible for me? So I wrote down a couple of practices for you that you can use. And a first practice, if you want to start developing your creativity a bit more, a first practice is, you can do this as a meditation or as a journaling exercise, but you just sit down and you try to remember a time in your life where you felt really free, really confident, where life was just effortless, where you were just enjoying the things you were doing. And it can be when you were a child. I was just doing this exercise before we started, and I saw this image of me sitting on a swing set, on a swing. And I felt what it felt like to not care about productivity, to just be on that swing, not care about time, how much time was passing, just being there in the moment. And it opened up so much space in my body, and I felt, oh, this is what, joy and playfulness feels like, just sitting on a swing. And it wasn't that I was like a super happy kid all the time. It was just this memory that got me back into that feeling. And this is something that I do with my clients as well. So I asked them, like, can you go back to a time where you felt so free, so effortless, when life was just so effortless, and what is it that you were doing? So that's the first step. You try and see what you were doing. Even as a kid, did you love to paint? Did you love to write, make up your own stories? What was it that, got your creative juices flowing? And then once you have that, the next step is that you start to see, what can I do this week? Make it super tangible. What can I do this week to sort of, incorporate that activity in my life? So if you really love to make bracelets, okay, what are the things I need to do to make sure that I make at least one bracelet this week? So I need to order some stuff. Maybe I don't have any supplies. Maybe I need to look up some techniques on the internet because I forgot everything that I ever knew about making bracelets. And then I need to block an hour on my calendar so that I actually have the time. Right? It's really easy. So those are 3 things that you could do to start making bracelets. Or writing is so much easier. If you've always loved writing, okay, you just schedule that hour where you can sit down and you start writing. And you just start writing a story just for the sake of it. Or you start painting, whatever it is. So that's the first practice I would recommend. Just incorporate something that you've always loved doing into your weekly routine and make sure that you stick to that. And I have a whole episode about setting intentions and sticking with them. So if you need some help developing that discipline, that's a good episode to refer back to. I think it's episode 71. That's all about sticking with your intentions. But for now, I'm just going to talk about the different practices, that you can incorporate. So second thing you can do, and this is from a book called The Artist's Way by, I think her name is Julia Cameron. Let me just look that up. Very quick. Yeah, Julia Cameron. She wrote a whole book about getting your creative juices flowing. So that is definitely a recommendation. I'll put it in the show notes. But one of the things that she suggests is that you take yourself out on an artist date every week. So that means that you do, again, something that's really connected to that intrinsic source of creativity that you have there. If you love art, it could mean going to a museum. For me, I think it falls under artist dates as well. I get really inspired by nature. So an artist date for me could be to go into nature, just really connecting to the cycles of nature, to the elements, and then seeing how those cycles and elements are reflected in my own body. And just sitting there and meditating and seeing what is it that wants to be birthed through me in terms of my creative endeavors. If you love music, you could go to a concert by yourself. But the thing is that you go by yourself to get inspired. So this isn't like something you do for fun with someone else. It's really about finding inspiration for your own creative endeavors. So that's the second practice, taking yourself out on an artist date. And then the third practice, and that's probably a bit related to the first one, but it's really good to start creating things that have no other purpose. You just create them for the sake of creating them. That's actually something I'm trying to teach my son now, that when we build, and it's also for my own benefit, because we love to play with Duplos. And I sometimes have a hard time when we build something beautiful to then, destroy it again. So now I tell him that at the start we're going to build something beautiful with the Duplos, and then our twin babies get to destroy it. I'll tell them, like, when they wake up from their nap, we let the babies destroy it. And he's like, yes, okay, let's do that. He doesn't care yet. So that's also really interesting to see. And this might be just my son, right? But he doesn't care yet whether we keep it or not. The reason why I started doing this is actually because of a movie. It's 7 Years in Tibet. And I remember in the movie that these monks, they would create mandalas on like beautiful pictures made with sand, colored sand. And there's all these patterns in there. And then once they've finished their mandala, they would just sweep it all up and start again. And I remember, so it was maybe 20 years back when I first saw that movie, thinking like, why would anyone do this? You've created something, you've reached your goal, and then you just destroy it. What's the purpose of that? And of course, that is the purpose. The purpose is understanding that there is no end goal, that it's the process that matters, which is so important for fertility also. It's the process. It's about really making sure that the way you experience your fertility journey nourishes you, helps you, heals you, rather than destroys you. So a third practice, create something every week just for the sake of creating it. I just got a mandala coloring book myself. I'm not I'm not super creative. So for me, I don't know, probably thinking back to that movie 7 years in Tibet, I thought, okay, let's just start coloring mandalas. And I can see or I can feel it straight away. Like once I sit down with my pencils, I start coloring in that mandala. I can feel something shifting in my body. And then I recognize, okay, this is what it feels like to be doing something just for the sake of doing it. There's no other purpose, and it creates a completely different energy in the body. So I hope that was useful. I'll recap those 3 practices. So journal on a time in your life when you were creating effortlessly, when everything was flowing, when you enjoyed what you were doing. So what is it that you were doing, and how can you integrate that in your week right now? 2, take yourself out on an artist date, so something you do by yourself to get inspired. And 3, create something just for the sake of creating it, and then maybe as me with the Diplos, you just destroy it again. I hope that was useful. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to me at on Instagram at thatfertilefeeling, or email me at francoise@thatfertilefeeling.com. I always love to hear from you, and I always get back to you, and hope to see you back next week. Bye bye.
Thank you for listening to That Fertile Feeling, the podcast. If you liked what you heard, then please head over to your preferred podcast player and subscribe to the show. It would also be great if you could leave a review and rating so that other listeners can find the show easily. And if you think that anyone you know could benefit from the materials on this show, then go ahead and share it with them. It would be much appreciated. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye, love.